When my son said I wasn't welcome at his wedding, I didn't argue. I signed one check and waited for the pastor's question. I always believed that family was the one bond that couldn't be severed. You raise a child, you pour yourself into them, and in return you hope not for perfection, not for blind loyalty, but at least for acknowledgement, respect, gratitude, something that reflects the years you gave away so they could build their own. My name doesn't matter here, not yet. What matters is the life I lived, the sacrifices I made, and the way one moment, one sentence, turned all of it into ashes. I grew up simple. No inheritance, no last name that opened doors. I worked my fingers into the soil of construction sites, my hands scarred by calluses that never quite healed. Brick by brick, I built homes for other people, while renting an old house with pipes that groaned each winter. And yet, in those years of scraping and saving, I had one purpose. My son, Michael. Michael was born in the spring, when the city streets smelled of rain and lilacs. I'll never forget that first cry, how small he looked in my hands, as though the world itself might crush him. His mother was gone by the time he turned 6. That left me both mother and father in one pair of tired shoes. I packed school lunches with stale bread. I worked overtime, so he'd never know the ache of hunger I did as a boy. I missed nights of sleep, but I never missed a parent-teacher conference. When he needed braces, I picked up an extra night shift. When he wanted to go to college, I sold the car and took the bus. I gave everything. And when he walked across that graduation stage, his cap tilted and his smile wide, I thought to myself, this is it. This is the proof my life mattered. But here's the thing about devotion. When it's unrecognized, it turns into a weapon that cuts deep. Michael met her 2 years later, Isabella. She came from a different world. Her family owned businesses I could never afford to walk into, restaurants with wine lists longer than my rent contract. She was elegant, polished, with a smile trained for photographs. She shook my hand with the kind of politeness that doesn't hide disdain, and though she called me sir, her eyes said I didn't belong. Still, I tried. I attended dinners where the forks outnumbered the plates. I wore the same black suit I'd kept for years, brushing at the worn sleeves before each event. And I smiled because my son loved her. If she made him happy, then who was I to stand in the way? But happiness, I learned, can be a facade. It was a Tuesday evening when Michael came to see me. He sat on the old couch in my living room, his shoulders tight, his wedding ring catching the faint light of the lamp. I offered him coffee, like I always did, and waited for him to speak. His voice was careful, rehearsed almost, the way a man speaks when he's afraid of what his own words might ignite. "Dad," he said, "about the wedding." I smiled. "I've been looking forward to it. Tell me what you need: flowers, a suit, whatever it takes. You know I'll be there." He looked down at his hands. His silence lasted long enough for my chest to tighten. Then he said it, the words that cleaved through every sacrifice I had ever made. "You're not invited, Dad. Isabella's family feels you don't fit the image. I'm sorry, but we have to think about how it looks. You understand. You understand." As though the years of sweat and blood, the nights I went without so he could have more, could be brushed aside for an image, for appearance, for a seat at a table I helped build but was never allowed to sit at. I didn't speak at first. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, the ticking of the wall clock louder than it had ever been. I looked at my son, the boy I had carried through fevers, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the boy whose nightmares I had chased away, and all I saw was a stranger, dressed in a suit that didn't belong to him, speaking a language that wasn't his own. Finally, I asked, "Is that what you really want, Michael? Or is that what they told you to say?" His jaw clenched. He didn't answer. That silence told me everything. I smiled then, not because I accepted it, Not because it didn't hurt, but because in that instant, something shifted inside me. A door opened in the dark. "All right," I said softly. "If that's the choice you've made, I won't argue." He looked relieved, almost grateful, as though I had given him permission to betray me. He stood, thanked me, hugged me briefly, and left. The door closed behind him with a finality that echoed through the walls. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table. My hands were steady, though my chest burned with the kind of fire that never cools. The betrayal was sharp, yes. But sharper still was the clarity. I had built Michael's life. Every brick, every door, every step he took toward that polished altar was laid with the sweat of my back. And now they wanted me erased, forgotten. They thought they could write me out of the story. But what they didn't know, what they would learn in time, was that I wasn't a man who begged for scraps. I was the foundation. And no house stands when the foundation decides to shake. So I smiled. I wrote one check. And I walked away. But walking away wasn't surrender. It was the beginning. Because on the day of that wedding, when the pastor asked if anyone objected, I would stand not with words, but with proof. Proof of who truly paid for their fantasy. Proof that the man they cast aside was the very man who built the ground beneath their feet. And when that moment came, everything would come crashing down. After Michael left that night, silence wrapped around me like a heavy cloak. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful, but suffocating. I sat at the kitchen table with the dim yellow bulb overhead, staring at the untouched coffee cooling in its chipped mug. The walls seemed to close in, pressing against me with memories I hadn't asked to relive. The refrigerator hummed in the background, and the tick of the wall clock marked each second, as though mocking me. Each tick was a reminder. Time moves forward, with or without you. And for the first time in my life, I felt I had been left behind by the very person I had carried forward. I could still smell the faint trace of Michael's cologne lingering in the air. It was expensive, something Isabella must have picked. Not the cheap aftershave I used to buy him when he was a teenager, when he wanted to smell grown up before high school dances. I had been proud then, handing him that small bottle, laughing as he sprayed half of it in one go and coughed at the strength of it. That smell was mine, asterisk this new one, this refined fragrance, it wasn't his. It was theirs. That's when the memories began to claw back, sharp and unrelenting. I remembered the nights of overtime, coming home past midnight, boots caked in cement dust, body aching in ways I never admitted. Michael would be asleep on the couch, his homework spread out across the coffee table. I'd pull a blanket over him and smile, because even in exhaustion, I believed it was worth it. I remembered the sound of his laughter when he learned to ride a bike. He had fallen so many times that his knees were more bruises than skin, but I kept running alongside him, pushing that little red bike until finally he stayed upright. His voice rang through the evening air. "Dad, I'm doing it." That sound had been music to me, sweeter than anything else. And I remembered the nights of fever, holding him against my chest, pressing cool cloths to his forehead, whispering promises that everything would be okay. I worked through those nights without sleep, afraid to close my eyes in case he needed me. Every breath he took was mine to guard. Now, years later, my own son had told me I wasn't fit to stand beside him at the altar, that I was an embarrassment, a blemish to be hidden. The humiliation burned hotter than any fever. I tried to sleep, but the bed felt foreign. The sheets, rough against my skin, seemed to whisper reminders of everything I had lost. I could hear the faint traffic outside, cars passing by, lives moving on while mine seemed frozen in betrayal. And then came the dreams. In one, I was sitting in the church pew, hidden in the back. The wedding music played, soft and grand, echoing off marble walls. Michael stood at the altar, radiant in his tailored suit, Isabella beside him in white silk. Everyone smiled. Everyone clapped. And when the pastor asked, "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" Isabella's father stood tall and proud, claiming the moment. I tried to stand, tried to speak, but my voice was gone. I clawed at my throat, choking on the silence. Nobody looked at me. Nobody saw me. It was as if I didn't exist. I woke drenched in sweat, heart racing, the echo of laughter still in my ears. Laughter not of joy, but of mockery. The days that followed blurred together. Work felt heavier. Each hammer strike on the construction site sounded like an insult. Each shovel of dirt like a reminder that I was being buried alive by my own sacrifices. Neighbors would stop me in passing, their voices cheerful. "Heard your boys getting married soon. You must be proud." Proud. The word stabbed me every time. I would force a smile, nod, and walk away quickly before the truth could surface. But behind closed doors, my chest ached with something darker than sadness. It wasn't just grief. It was rejection, sharp and cruel. It was the realization that I had been cast aside not by strangers, but by my own flesh and blood. I found myself staring at objects in my house differently. The old baseball glove we bought together at a yard sale, it sat on a shelf, dusty, unused, mocking me with memories of father-son games in the fading summer light. The faded drawings he made as a child, taped still to the fridge, each one signed with clumsy handwriting. To Dad. They looked like artifacts now, relics of a bond that no longer existed. I would trace my fingers over those old papers, feel the waxy crayon lines beneath my skin, and wonder, was all of it real? Or was I fooling myself into believing love was something that couldn't be erased? One night, I poured myself a glass of whiskey, something I rarely allowed. The liquid burned my throat as I stared at my reflection in the window. My face was older than I remembered, etched with lines that told stories of years spent working, worrying, sacrificing. But the eyes, they carried something new. Not just sorrow. Something colder. Something sharper. That's when the flashbacks shifted from tender to bitter. I remembered Isabella's parents at the first dinner. The way they glanced at my suit, their eyes sliding over me like I was a servant instead of family. I remember the conversation where Isabella spoke about legacy, about status, and the way Michael nodded, eager to please. I remembered every detail, the glint of silverware, the faint smell of expensive wine, the soft classical music in the background, as if the room itself had conspired to tell me, "You don't belong here." And perhaps that's when the seed had been planted. Not on the night Michael told me I wasn't invited, but long before, when I first felt invisible at a table I helped him earn a seat at. Now the seed was growing, watered by humiliation, fed by betrayal. But it wasn't just rage that lived inside me. No, rage is quick and reckless. This was something heavier, patient, the kind of weight that presses against you until you either collapse or learn to push back. I began to imagine the wedding, not with longing, but with detail. I pictured the white flowers lined along the aisle, the polished chandeliers casting golden light, the smug smiles of Isabella's family as they showcased their union like a prize. I pictured Michael looking out into the crowd, never searching for me, never realizing that without me, none of it would exist. And then I pictured myself standing there, not in the back, not erased, but present, visible, unignorable. The thought was faint at first, like a whisper in the dark. But each day it grew louder. They thought they had written me out of the story, but I would write myself back in with ink they couldn't erase. There's a moment when grief burns itself out, when the tears dry, when the ache dulls, and all that's left is silence. That silence can destroy a man, or it can forge him into something new. For weeks, I lived in that silence. The betrayal festered in me like a wound that refused to close. Every day, I carried it with me to work, to the grocery store, even in the quiet hours before dawn when the world still slept. But slowly, something shifted. I realized that pain is only half of the equation. The other half is what you do with it. And I decided I would not waste mine. It happened one evening, late. The sky outside was bruised purple, the city lights bleeding through the curtains. I was sitting at the table again, the same chipped mug in my hand, when my phone buzzed. A message. From Michael. It was brief. Cold. Dad, just a reminder not to come to the wedding. Please respect that. I'll send photos after. Photos. I stared at that word until it blurred. After all the years of being his shadow, his anchor, his shield, he was offering me a photograph. As though I were some distant relative, a ghost who had no right to stand where he stood. That was the moment. The room seemed to tilt, the hum of the refrigerator gone, the tick of the clock swallowed by a deeper rhythm. My own heartbeat. Slow, steady, dangerous. I whispered aloud to the empty room. No, you won't erase me. Not this time. The decision crystallized in me. Solid. Immovable. I wasn't going to beg for inclusion. I wasn't going to cry for acceptance. I wasn't even going to argue. I was going to take back what was mine with precision. And it began with one simple truth. Everything they had, every detail of that perfect wedding, was bought with money that came from my hands. From the years of labor, the extra shifts, the savings scraped together penny by penny. They thought I was just some background character, an embarrassment. But they had built their entire fantasy castle on a foundation I laid. And, if I wanted, I could make the whole thing collapse. The clarity hit me like cold water. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. The grief lifted, replaced by purpose. It wasn't just about being seen anymore. It was about justice, about balance. About reminding him that you don't spit on the hand that built your future without consequences. I stood and walked through the house, letting my fingers graze over the relics of our life together. The baseball glove, the drawings, the broken lamp we never fixed. Each object wasn't just memory, it was evidence. Proof of the years no one could erase. And in my mind, the plan began to take shape. I would attend that wedding, not as a guest, not as a father begging for recognition, but as the reckoning. I imagined the scene in vivid detail. The pastor's voice echoing, "If anyone here objects, speak now, or forever hold your peace." That pause, that breath, when the world goes still. Everyone expecting silence. And then me. Not raising my voice in anger, not pleading. No, I would speak with calm authority. I would reveal the truth. That every flower, every rented chandelier, every polished plate of food existed, because I had paid for it. That the man they deemed unworthy was the only reason their fantasy could exist. I pictured Isabella's face paling, her parents shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Guests whispering, the illusion crumbling like cheap plaster. And Michael, my son, forced to see what he had done, forced to face me. The thought didn't just satisfy me, it ignited me. From that night forward, my life became sharper. Every morning, I rose with purpose. My mind no longer drifted aimlessly between sorrow and memory. It focused. Each thought, each breath, moved toward a single destination, the wedding. At work, my coworkers noticed the change. "You seem different," one of them said as we carried lumber to the site. I smiled but didn't answer. How could I explain that beneath the sweat and dirt, I was building not just homes, but an ending? Even in the smallest things, I found new energy. The air tasted different. Food filled me, instead of turning to ash in my mouth. The city itself seemed to move with me. Every sound from the honk of a horn to the echo of footsteps becoming part of a rhythm that drove me forward. And inside, a voice repeated, "They tried to erase you. Show them you cannot be erased." I began writing in a notebook at night. Pages of thoughts, plans, calculations. How much I had spent over the years. How every expense from braces to tuition to deposits traced back to me. The numbers told a story no one could deny. A ledger of sacrifice written in ink. But I didn't just want proof. I wanted impact. I wanted the truth to land so hard it shattered their pride. I practiced what I might say. Standing in front of the bathroom mirror, I spoke aloud. You said I didn't fit the image. But here's the truth. I am the image. Without me, there is no story. Without me, there is no wedding. And today, in front of everyone, you will remember who I am. My reflection stared back at me, and for the first time in months, I saw not a broken man, but a man reborn. The breaking point wasn't destruction. It was awakening. And once you wake, you cannot go back to sleep. The decision was made. The breaking point had passed. Now came the part that suited me best, the part that required patience, precision, and foresight. I had built homes from the ground up, read blueprints, balanced budgets, and managed crews that couldn't afford a single mistake. Revenge, I realized, was no different. Justice required architecture. And I was still a builder at heart. The first thing I did was sit down with my notebook again, but this time not for grief, not for therapy. This was strategy. Page by page, I wrote down numbers. Every expense tied to Michael's life. I pulled out old receipts from a folder I had kept for years, each one carefully stored away in case I ever needed proof of where my money had gone. The deposit for his first apartment. The check I wrote for his college tuition. The down payment on his car. The braces. The school trips. The medical bills. Line after line, the story took shape not in words, but in dollars. A ledger of sacrifice no one could argue with. Then I turned to the wedding itself. Michael hadn't asked me for money directly, but over the years I had given him enough that every step of his life now bled into this event. The savings I provided allowed him to buy the ring. The car that drove him to dinner dates with Isabella was one I had co-signed. Even the suit he wore on their engagement photos, bought with a bonus I had gifted him last Christmas. Every detail of their perfect image bore my fingerprints. I would make that undeniable. I went to the bank and ordered official statements that traced transactions back years. I wanted documents stamped and sealed, undeniable evidence that this wedding was built on my back. When the teller handed me the folder, I thanked her and slipped it into my worn leather bag. To her, it was just paperwork. To me, it was ammunition. That night, I spread the papers across my kitchen table like blueprints. The lamp's glow made the numbers gleam. I drew circles, arrows, notes in the margins. A narrative formed. This is what they erased. This is what they owe. But I knew paper alone wasn't enough. People believe what they feel, not just what they read. So I began to think about the moment. The wedding schedule would follow tradition. I had been to enough to know the rhythm. The vows, the exchange of rings, the pastor's pause. That pause was the key. If anyone objects, speak now or forever hold your peace. It was theatrical by design, and I would use it. But standing up in anger wasn't enough. If I raised my voice too soon, they'd dismiss me as bitter. If I waited too long, the moment would pass. I needed precision, the kind of timing that left no room for retreat. I practiced in front of the mirror, not shouting, calm, controlled. The tone of a man who wasn't begging for attention, but simply delivering truth. I began asking quiet questions. Not to Michael, he had cut me out completely, but to neighbors, acquaintances, anyone connected. I learned that the wedding would be held in one of the grand halls uptown, the kind with white marble floors and chandeliers imported from Europe. A place meant to impress, to scream wealth. I even visited the hall under the guise of interest in booking it for a retirement party. I walked the corridors slowly, memorizing exits, doors, seating arrangements. The staff gave me a brochure glossy with photos, and I tucked it away like a soldier memorizing a battlefield. I noted the acoustics of the room, the way footsteps echoed on marble, how voices carried. My words wouldn't just be heard, they would linger, ricochet off the walls, impossible to ignore. Late at night, I rehearsed what I might say. I wanted my words to cut, but not as a weapon. More like a scalpel, sharp, precise, impossible to deflect. Michael, you told me I didn't fit the image. But let everyone here know the truth. Without me, there is no image. Every flower, every rented hall, every polished plate, you're standing on the shoulders of the man you cast aside. I rehearsed Isabella's parents' reactions in my head. I could almost see her father frowning, her mother whispering in disbelief. I rehearsed the gasps of the crowd, the shifting of chairs, the whispers spreading like fire. Most of all, I rehearsed Michael's face. Would he flinch? Would he turn away? Or would he finally, for the first time in years, truly look at me? My first real victory came unexpectedly. I ran into an old friend from the neighborhood, a man who remembered the years I worked double shifts to pay for Michael's schooling. Over beers, he said, "You carried that boy on your back. Everyone knew it. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." That affirmation was fuel. It reminded me that the truth wasn't just mine, it was visible to others, even if Michael pretended otherwise. I also began to test my resolve in smaller ways. I spoke more directly at work. I confronted small injustices I might have ignored before. If someone tried to shift blame for a mistake, I calmly corrected them. These weren't just exercises in confidence, they were practice for the confrontation to come. One evening, I drove by Michael's apartment just to see if he was home. Through the window, I glimpsed him and Isabella laughing, candles on the table, a life that looked untouched by guilt. For a moment, the plan faltered. My chest tightened, and I thought, what if I'm wrong? What if speaking up will only make me look pathetic? The doubt gnawed at me. That night, I tore out 3 pages from my notebook, crumpled them, and tossed them into the trash. The sound of the paper hitting the bin was like failure. But in the silence that followed, another thought rose. They already erased you. What more can you lose? The question was a revelation. If I did nothing, I was already invisible. If I spoke, at least I would exist. And so the resolve returned, stronger than before. By the week before the wedding, the plan was clear. 1. Arrive early, not as a guest, but as a ghost among the staff, blending in unnoticed. 2. Sit at the back, close enough to hear, far enough to observe. 3. Wait for the moment. The pastor's pause, the silence of expectation. 4. Stand calmly. No theatrics, no anger. Just a man with proof. 5. Reveal the truth. Documents if necessary. But more importantly, words that carried the weight of a lifetime. It wasn't about ruining the wedding with chaos. It was about reclaiming my place in the story with dignity, with authority. And when the day came, I would be ready. I closed my notebook, the final page filled with neat handwriting. My pen rested across it like a seal. For the first time in months, I slept deeply, the kind of sleep that comes not from peace, but from purpose. The foundation was laid. The structure was ready. All that remained was execution. The morning of the wedding arrived with a sky too perfect to be trusted. Clear blue, sunlight spilling across the rooftops, the kind of day people point to and say, "What a blessing." For me, it was no blessing. It was Judgment Day. I dressed carefully, not in anything flashy, but in a suit that carried history. It wasn't new, not tailored like the ones Michael and his in-laws would wear. But it was mine, black wool, a little frayed at the cuffs, the same one I'd worn to his graduation, to his first job interview, to every milestone where I had stood quietly in the background. The fabric smelled faintly of mothballs, but also of time, of memory, of loyalty. I tucked my folder of documents under my arm, the leather bag slung across my shoulder like a soldier carrying his weapon. Inside it, more than paper, it was proof, it was voice, it was the invisible years made visible. I arrived at the hall early, blending with a small crowd of staff moving flowers and trays. No one noticed me, they never did. I walked slowly through the corridors I had memorized during my reconnaissance visit. The marble floors gleamed, reflecting chandeliers that glittered above. The air smelled of roses and expensive polish, the scent of wealth trying to mask the stench of arrogance. The guests began to arrive, dressed in silks, tuxedos, shimmering gowns. I kept my head low, slipping into the back pew, far enough to observe, close enough to strike. The music swelled violins, delicate and practiced. My heart beat in rhythm with them, steady, deliberate. Michael appeared at the altar. My son. He looked sharp in his suit, confident, a man admired by his peers. But I saw through it. I saw the boy I raised, the boy who once needed my steady hand, now trying to erase the very hand that had held him. Then Isabella entered. The room sighed collectively, as if her white gown carried divinity itself. The lace sparkled. The veil floated like mist, and her father walked beside her with the proud posture of a king presenting his daughter to the world. Their faces glowed not with love, but with victory. I sat still, waiting. The ceremony unfolded as expected. Vows rehearsed, rings exchanged, smiles that felt carved from marble. Each word was a hammer, striking the illusion deeper into place. And then, the moment. The pastor's voice rang out, firm, ceremonial. "If anyone here objects to this union, speak now or forever hold your peace." The pause. The silence. It stretched, thick and electric. Everyone expected nothing. A smooth transition to the kiss, the applause, the celebration. That was when I stood. Chairs creaked as heads turned. A ripple moved through the crowd, whispers rising like wind before storm. I didn't rush. I didn't raise my voice. I stepped into the silence with calm authority, my words clear, carrying across marble and chandeliers. "I object." Gasps erupted. Isabella froze, her smile shattering. Her father's hand tightened around her arm. Michael's eyes widened, shock flashing across his face. The pastor stammered, caught off guard. "Sir, on what grounds?" I held up the leather folder. "On the grounds that this entire spectacle, this fantasy, stands on the back of a man you erased. Me." The room was silent again, save for the faint echo of my voice. Every eye fixed on me. I stepped forward slowly, my shoes tapping against marble like a drumbeat of inevitability. I opened the folder and spread the papers. On the front pew, bank statements, receipts, proof. This suit on his back? Paid from the bonus I gave him. The car he drove her in on their first date? Co-signed by me. The education that landed him the job that affords him this circle. I looked directly at Isabella's parents. Funded by me. Every step he's taken toward this altar built with my hands, my sweat, my sacrifice. Whispers exploded through the crowd. Isabella's father shifted in his seat, his face darkening. Her mother's lips parted, stunned. I turned to Michael. "And yet, you told me I wasn't welcome." that I didn't fit the image. The words hung heavy, dripping with betrayal. Michael's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. Dad, please, not here. Not here. My voice sharpened. You erased me here. You chose this place, this moment, to tell the world that your father wasn't worthy to stand beside you. And now the world will know the truth. The pastor tried to intervene, his voice shaky. Perhaps we should continue. No, Isabella's voice cut through, brittle and cold. She looked at me with venom. This is not your day. This is our day. I smiled then, calm, almost pitying. That's where you're wrong. This day was never yours. Without me, there would be no wedding, no gown, no ring, no hall. Everything you built was stolen from the man you cast aside. Gasps again. A guest stood, muttering, "Is it true?" Another whispered, "I heard he raised the boy alone." The whispers spread like fire. Michael's face flushed red. Dad, stop. You're embarrassing me. Embarrassing you? I stepped closer, my voice low but fierce. Son, you embarrassed yourself the moment you chose appearances over blood. The moment you turned your back on the man who made this day possible. Silence followed, so thick you could hear the rustle of gowns, the shallow breathing of the crowd. And then it broke. Isabella's father stood abruptly, his voice sharp. Enough of this nonsense. You're nothing but a bitter old man trying to steal attention. I met his gaze, steady. I'm not stealing anything. I'm reclaiming what was stolen. Dignity, truth, a father's rightful place. I turned once more to the crowd, my voice carrying, unshaken. I was told I didn't fit the image. But let everyone here see the image clearly. The man cast out is the man who built this. And no amount of polish, no amount of silk, can erase that truth. The silence that followed was heavier than applause. It was the silence of realization, of judgment shifting. Faces turned not with admiration toward the bride's family, but with suspicion, with pity, with contempt. The illusion had shattered. Michael looked down, his hands trembling. Isabella's smile was gone, replaced by a mask cracking under pressure. Her parents shifted uneasily, their pride wounded in front of their peers. I had done it. I had turned their perfect image into rubble, not with rage, but with truth. I gathered my papers, tucked them back into the folder, and walked toward the doors. Each step echoed like a victory drumbeat. No one stopped me. No one dared. And as I left, the pastor's voice faltered, his words unsure, the ceremony tainted, forever stained. The foundation had shaken, and the house was crumbling. When I stepped out of that hall, the sunlight felt different, warmer, lighter. The air carried weight, but it wasn't mine anymore, it was theirs. The burden of appearances, of lies, of carefully constructed facades. I had set it down at the altar and left it there for them to choke on. I didn't run. I didn't hide. I walked slowly, purposefully, each step measured, as if I had all the time in the world. People in the parking lot looked at me curiously, unaware of the storm that had just broken inside. I almost smiled. Let them go in expecting a celebration. Let them find ruin instead. By the time I got home, my phone had already begun to buzz. Messages, calls, notifications flooding in. I ignored them at first, pouring myself a glass of water and sitting at the table. The same table where I had planned, where I had wrestled with grief. Now it was quiet, not suffocating, but restful. Finally, I looked at the phone. There were messages from old friends who had been at the wedding. You were brave. Everyone was stunned. They'll never forget what you said. You spoke the truth. Respect. And then, messages from Michael. Dozens of them. First pleading. Then angry. Then silent. I didn't reply. Not yet. News travels fast in circles built on pride. By the next day, Whispers of the interruption had spread beyond the wedding guests. Isabella's family, once so secure in their polished image, found themselves at the center of gossip they couldn't control. Business associates began to ask questions. Is it true her fiancé's father wasn't invited? That he was erased for not fitting in? The story twisted through the city like wildfire, each retelling making the family seem smaller, pettier, weaker. Michael tried to call me again. I let it ring. The boy who once silenced me with 4 words, "You don't fit the image," now found himself silenced by my absence. Isabella, I later heard, was furious. Her carefully crafted picture of a flawless wedding had been ruined. Photographs showed her smile brittle, Michael's eyes distant, guests whispering in the background. No frame could hide the truth anymore. The marriage, I knew, was built on the same weak foundation as their pride. And weak foundations don't last. In the days that followed, I found myself thinking less about revenge and more about balance. I hadn't destroyed Michael, I hadn't needed to. I had simply pulled back the curtain, revealed the truth, and let the world judge for itself. And that was enough. Because revenge, I realized, isn't always about burning everything down. Sometimes it's about standing tall in the fire and showing that you cannot be erased. I thought back to the years of sacrifice. The lunches packed with stale bread, the nights of fever, the calluses that still scarred my hands. For so long, I had believed those sacrifices went unnoticed. But that day, in that hall, they became undeniable. The proof was no longer hidden in old receipts and faded memories. It was carved into the silence of 100 witnesses who saw the truth with their own eyes. I wasn't erased. I was remembered. One evening, a week after the wedding, I heard a knock on my door. When I opened it, Michael stood there. No suit, no polished cologne, no practiced posture. Just my son, shoulders slumped, eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. We stood in silence for a moment. Then he said quietly, "Dad, I'm sorry." The words were raw, stripped of pride. They didn't erase the pain, but they cracked something open. I didn't let him in right away. I didn't rush to embrace him. Instead, I looked at him the way he had once looked at me, as a boy waiting to see if he meant what he said. "You chose them over me," I said softly. "You erased me." His eyes filled with tears. "I know. And I was wrong. I see it now. Everyone saw it. I can't change what I did, but I want to make it right." For the first time in months, my chest loosened. Not with forgiveness, not yet, but with the possibility of it. Making it right, I told him, starts with remembering who you are. And who made you who you are? He nodded, tears spilling down his cheeks. And in that moment, I knew the message had landed. Not just at the wedding, not just in whispers through the city, but here where it mattered, in his heart. As I sit here now, telling you this story, I don't ask for your sympathy. I don't even ask for your approval. What I ask is simple, to remember that justice is not always loud, not always violent. Sometimes justice is truth, revealed at the right time, in the right way, so that those who tried to bury you can no longer deny you. They wanted me gone, forgotten, invisible. Instead, I stood taller than ever. And when the pastor's words echoed in that marble hall, "If anyone objects," I did not hold my peace. I spoke. And in that moment, I reclaimed not just my dignity, but my freedom. Now I ask you, watching, listening, what would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed silent, swallowed the humiliation, and let the image go unchallenged? Or would you have stood, as I did, and spoken the truth, no matter how much it shook the room? Tell me in the comments below. Share your thoughts, your stories. And if this story struck a chord with you, if you believe in justice, in truth, in reclaiming what was stolen, then like this video, share it with others. and subscribe for more stories. Because sometimes the only way to survive betrayal is to turn it into fire. And sometimes the only way to honor sacrifice is to make sure the world sees it. When the noise of that day faded, the silence that followed wasn't the suffocating kind I had once known. It was different now, cleaner, clearer, like the calm after a storm when the air smells of rain and smoke, and you realize the world is washed, but scarred. I sat by the window in the evenings, the glass cool against my fingers, watching the world go about its business. Cars passed, children played, neighbors carried groceries. Nothing about the city had changed, and yet everything inside me had. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a man begging to be seen. I felt like a man who had reminded the world and himself that he was unerasable. In the weeks that followed, I heard the rumor swirl. At the diner where I sometimes ate breakfast, two women at the counter whispered loudly enough for me to catch fragments. "Did you hear? The bride's family, embarrassed right there in front of everyone. Her father's business partners are furious. They say his pride cost him respect." Even the waitress leaned closer when she refilled my coffee. "Were you there?" she asked quietly, her eyes wide with curiosity. I only gave her a small smile and sipped my coffee. Some stories are more powerful when people wonder, when they piece together fragments themselves. The truth had already grown wings. I didn't need to chase it. Michael came to me again a few days later. Not with arrogance this time, but with something I hadn't seen in years. Humility. He sat on my couch, staring at his hands. They trembled slightly. The same hands I had once guided across a bike handle. The same hands I had held when he crossed the street as a boy. "I can't sleep," he admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I see the looks on their faces. Isabella hasn't spoken to me since that night. Her parents, they blame me. They say I should have kept you away, that I failed them." I watched him carefully, letting the words sink in. It was tempting to gloat, to remind him that he had chosen them over me, that this pain was the cost of betrayal. But fatherhood, no matter how bruised, doesn't stop overnight. Instead, I said, maybe what you're feeling isn't failure. Maybe it's truth. And truth has a way of waking you up, even if it hurts. His eyes lifted, wet with shame. "I didn't want to erase you, Dad. I thought it would make things easier. For them. For me." I leaned forward, my voice steady. "Son, listen to me carefully. When you erase your foundation to please strangers, you don't make things easier, you make them weaker. You built your future on sand, and now it's crumbling. Not because I stood up, but because you forgot where the ground beneath your feet came from." He bowed his head, silent. For the first time, I think he understood. Later, I heard through neighbors that Isabella had stormed out of their apartment one night, her voice carrying through the thin city walls. She shouted words like embarrassment, ruined, and image. To her, I hadn't just disrupted a wedding. I had cracked the mirror she stared into every morning, the one that told her she was flawless. I don't know if they stayed together. Part of me suspects they didn't, because marriages built on appearances are like glass chandeliers, beautiful from afar, but one good shake and the pieces scatter. At night, I often return to the old notebook, pages still filled with numbers, arrows, plans. But now, instead of plotting, I wrote reflections. Not for anyone else, but for myself. One entry read, "Justice is not about destruction. It's about restoration. Today, I restored myself." Another, "The greatest betrayal was not being uninvited. It was being unseen. But the greatest victory was making them see me again, even if it burned." I filled page after page, not with anger anymore, but with lessons. Lessons for myself, for Michael if he ever wanted to read them, maybe even for anyone who would one day listen to this story. What surprised me most were the eyes of strangers, people who had been at the wedding or who had simply heard the story secondhand, began looking at me differently. At the grocery store, an older man clasped my shoulder. "You did what most of us never dare," he said. "You stood up. For yourself. For truth." I respect that. Even at work, where my coworkers had once joked about me being too quiet, there was a shift. "Boss," one of the younger men called me, though I wasn't his boss. That was some backbone you showed. It made me realize something. When you stand up, you don't just stand for yourself. You stand for everyone who has been silenced, erased, humiliated. My moment had become theirs too, a spark of courage they carried into their own lives. One night, when the house was quiet, I sat at the table and began to write Michael a letter. Not to hand to him immediately, but to keep for the right moment. It began, "Son, you once told me I didn't fit the image. But the truth is, I am the image. Every step you've taken was built on my sacrifices. I don't say this to hold you down, but to lift you up, to remind you that roots matter. Without them, trees fall in the storm. You are my son, and nothing, not even betrayal, can erase that. But remember this, dignity cannot be rented. It cannot be bought with silk or chandeliers. It is earned, and it is kept. Don't forget who you are, and don't forget who I am." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the notebook, waiting. Weeks stretched into months. The fury faded. The humiliation I had carried was no longer heavy. It was like a scar, tender when touched, but proof that healing had taken place. Sometimes, late at night, I still wondered, could things have been different if Michael had chosen differently? Could we have sat side by side at that altar, proud, united? Perhaps. But life doesn't give back what's lost. It only gives you the chance to reclaim what remains. And what remained for me was dignity. I had walked into that hall invisible and walked out unforgettable. As I share this story with you now, I know some will call me cruel, others brave. Some will say I should have stayed silent, swallowed my pain, and let my son live his life. But ask yourself this: how many times have you swallowed humiliation just to keep the peace? How many times have you erased yourself so others could shine? There comes a day when silence is betrayal, not loyalty. And that day came for me when the pastor asked, "Does anyone object?" I did, not out of spite, but out of truth. And truth, once spoken, cannot be forgotten. So now I turn to you. If you were in my shoes, cast aside by the very child you raised, told you didn't fit the image, what would you have done? Would you have stayed quiet? Or would you have stood, as I did, and spoken the truth even when the room wanted silence? Comment below. Share your thoughts, your own stories of betrayal, of justice, of standing up when no one else would. Because these stories aren't just mine, they're ours. And if this story moved you, if you felt the fire in it, then like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more. Because every time we tell these stories, we remind the world, dignity cannot be erased. And sometimes, the most powerful words you can ever speak are the ones you're told to hold forever in silence.